You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to Literary Treks, Trek FM's local books and comics show. I am but one of your hosts, Casey Pettitt, and with me, as he always is Jonathan Koan. Jonathan, how are you on this fine pre-fall day as we're recording?
I'm doing great. Down here in Georgia, it was getting so cool and so nice, and then this week the heat came back and it's been awful.
No.
But I'm staying inside more and reading more, which is nice because I enjoyed this book.
Excellent. Yes, and I did too. Yes, and it's kind of doing the same thing here. It's weird. It'll get down into like the 60s and then jump back up into the 80s and then be in the 70s for a while, and just you never know what to wear outside. Mm-hmm. So I advocate for staying inside. I like that.
Yep,
I'm an inside guy. And yeah, and I really enjoyed this book too, and I can't wait to talk about it. And that, of course, is the final of the Lost Era books, the ones that are at least called the Lost Era, Catalyst of Sorrows. And we'll be talking about that here in just a few minutes. But first, I want to let everybody know how to get in touch with the network here and with us. You can find the network online at trek.fm, on X and Instagram at trekfm, facebook.com/trekfm. And then while you're on Facebook, go ahead and just find the Babel Conference, which is our listeners only Facebook group. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field and it should come right up. And lots of folks in there and lots of good discussions you can have about these episodes that we drop or anything else. And honestly, I would love for people to tell us what they want us to read next, because sometimes we struggle with that. So we want to read what you want us to read. So why don't you let us know there? And then another good place you can go is to the Goodreads group. Just look for Literary Treks in the Goodreads groups, and I think you have to answer a question or two, and then we'll let you in. And the bookcases there, the bookshelves, or however they call it there, are always updated with what we're currently reading and going to be reading coming up. So take a look at that if you're curious and want to get ahead on what we're reading. Check us out there. And lastly, if you would please go to patreon.com/trekfm and throw a little support our way. There's lots of different tiers that you can join if you're so inclined, including being an associate producer on any of the shows that you love. And if you love this one, you can join Greg Rosier and myself as an associate producer of Literary Treks. So please join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/trekfm. And Jonathan, we got a little bit of news today, a newish book release that we've got, and some comics updates. So why don't you tell us about the book that's coming out that you don't have in your hand?
Yes, but you do. We have the book Star Trek Picard No Man's Land, which releases on the 24th of September. And my copy is on the way. Your copy has already arrived. And this is a print version of the audio drama that they did, the Picard audio drama that has Raffi and Seven of Nine in it. And this came out in early, I think it was like March of 2022, it was early 2022 that this came out. It was just an audiobook. And the Star Trek people decided to follow the Star Wars people, because Star Wars has been doing this where they release it in audio drama first, and then a few months later for Star Wars they would release the print version. Well, we're getting the print version now, but like 2 years later. But we're getting the print version, which we're happy about. And it's about 150 pages in script format. So it should be, for those of you who are worried about long reads, this one will be a very quick single sitting read. And I'm excited purely because it's Kristen Beyer, and I enjoy her writing quite a bit on the books. And this is her first book since I think 2018-ish, 2019, somewhere around there. It's been a while.
It's been a while, yeah, because her last Voyager book came out it was during her time, I think, on the new shows, but it just kind of kept getting delayed because she was so busy. But so it's always nice to have Kirsten Beyer's name on something. And
then we also have the new IDW Star Trek 500, which is out. It is a special one-shot, and it contains 7 different stories set in various eras of Star Trek with contributors like this is so funny. The contributors like comedian and Star Trek fan Patton Oswalt, which is so funny because he just did something for Star Wars a couple weeks ago. Yeah, so he's just hitting all the stuff. Yeah,
he's stamping his nerd card everywhere.
Exactly, yeah. Or infuriating nerds if you're, one of those exclusive people. Can't be both. And then there's also an essay by one of our friends of the podcast who's usually in the green room, Dayton Ward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exciting. I think that just came out earlier this month. So I know it's been a while since we've done any comics, so we'll definitely have to do, if not a catch-up episode, we'll just have to start really getting those comics back into our rotation so we can get to this one. But that's pretty, Star Trek comics have been out for a long, long time. Maybe Marvel had it for a while, DC, Wildstorm, I feel like everybody's had it, but now IDW's had it. I don't remember when they started, but to have 500 issues is a pretty big feat. So, especially in the Star Trek world where, since this property's been kind of traded around the comics for a long time, they've obviously, done pretty well with them. And, like anything else, they've had some ups and downs, but, for not being a comic reader, there's been several stories that they put out that I've really enjoyed. And, it's just a great accomplishment for them. So
it'll be impressive if they can surpass the total number of Star Trek episodes there are when they surpass with the number of issues. Because I think we're in 700 episodes, somewhere around there now.
Yeah,
of Star Trek when you combine all the different shows, including the animateds.
Plus the 800 and some odd books that we've got. Yeah,
that's also true. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the news we've got. Don't forget, I think is it November coming up in a couple months? So we've got a new Star Trek Strange New Worlds book.
Which we finally have the cover for.
We finally got the cover for. Which I think is just a cast photo, basically. But
it's just a cast photo, which is all the Strange New Worlds covers. But at least we have a cover.
Exactly.
Because I really was worried that we were just going to get a cover not found when we got the book.
Yeah. It's just going to be this gray cover.
It's good. No, we're going to get one. We're just going to get a blank hardback and it just says cover not final.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that would be good. That'll be our copies that we get.
Our copies, exactly.
Yes. And that one is Asylum by Una McCormick.
Asylum.
Yeah, so that'll be cool because it's been a minute since we've had an Una book too. So Una writing about Una. So that should be good.
Yes.
So be sure
Has she ever written about Una before?
Actually, I don't think so because this will only be the second Strange
New Worlds book, but I don't think she wrote for Una when they were using her in TOS.
Yeah, because I don't think she wrote any of the TOS stories or anything. So yeah. Well, she's kind of like Kirsten Beyer, another author that it's always a pleasure to have anything from. So maybe she'll work Garrick into it. Who knows? But be sure to pre-order that book because we'll be talking about that one as soon as we get our little hands on it, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to Una about it too.
If she can get Garrick into this, I will applaud her. That is like impressive. That would be impressive if she can pull that off.
Just or some little Easter egg that if you know Garrick well enough,
exactly,
you'll see something come through. That'd be good.
There's just gonna be a Cardassian Taylor in the background.
There you go.
Who's unnamed.
Yeah, who might be a spy.
Might be a spy.
Oh, that's good. Well, okay. Enough of that. Let's go. Let's just turn the page and go talk about our feature book today.
You could say we are dying to get to it.
Oh boy. Well, yeah, so today we are, as I mentioned before, finishing up the Lost Era books. This one's set in 2316. It's called Catalyst of Sorrows by Margaret Wander Bonanno, and features Uhura and a young Ben Sisko on the cover. So, as an Uhura story, just kind of to start, one of the things I love too is that we actually get her full name. I feel like most books anymore only call her Uhura until we actually, really. Well, this actually came out before Star Trek 2009, I guess, when they named her on screen Nyota Uhura. But we actually get that name in this book too, which I know it's been around forever.
I'm gonna say, wasn't it in the Wrath of Khan novelization that we got it for the first time? Because that was, I think, in like 82, I think.
It might have even been before that, because I think...
No, I'm pretty sure it was Vonda that did it.
Was it? Then it might have been in the Entropy
Effect. If it wasn't in
that,
it may have been an Entropy Effect. Yeah. But I know it was in one of the two, like, it was Vonda McIntyre who did it.
Yeah. I think actually, now that you say that, I think it was an Entropy Effect. I was thinking of Uhura's song, but I think it was an Entropy Effect, because we got somebody else's name in there too, which I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyhow, we get her as one of the central characters, but kind of like, well, not like Well of Souls with Rachel Garrett, but in a somewhat similar way, she is Uhura is kind of an ancillary character in this story. We get to see her as the head of Starfleet Intelligence, which I thought just was a very smart choice, whether this author did it or she might have been in some of the other books, but I just felt like in this book in particular, that role was awesome for Uhura as like the head of Starfleet's not Starfleet Security, Starfleet Intelligence, just because it kind of used all her skills as a communicator and everything, but also just kind of put her in this really great kind of command position, which we don't really get to see almost ever.
Yeah, I was really impressed by particularly the first half of this book, because really, if you think about it, the first half of the book is Uhura's book, and the second half of the book is Ben Sisko's book. Because I was about 100 pages in, and I almost tweeted, there's going to be Ben Sisko in this Ben Sisko book, right? Because you're 100 pages in, he's not in it. It's not till like about page 100 that he finally shows up. And it's really interesting because the structure of the book is very much, the first half is planning or figuring out what's going on and planning the big mission. And the second half of the book is executing that mission. Uhura's not going to go in the field, obviously. No. So she's in the planning stages at the beginning. And the young person, Sisko, is the one who's actually in the carrying it out phase. And so he's the one that's actually, in the second half of the book. So it almost felt like two stories that are like one big story as well, which is kind of interesting that it was written that way. But going back to Uhura, I really enjoyed her perspective here because, I think she mentions in the book she's about 120 years old. Yeah. Which for Star Trek, for, maybe, for a human, that's still getting up there. Yeah. And we've seen just 4 years later what McCoy looks like when he's 134. He is no spring chicken in that episode, that we saw in Encounter at Farpoint, and he's here as well, just 4 years earlier. And I'm just very impressed with Star Trek's ability to cast, because they were like near retirement age. Yeah, in Star Trek 6. Star Trek 6, like the whole point of the Star Treks 2 through 6 really is about this generation getting older, coming to grips with the fact that they need to pass things on and stuff like that. That was like really, to me, one of the main parts of the movies. And so you end Star Trek 6, which this book really ties into. That's like if you usually we say, what's the one movie or TV episode that this really ties into? I'd say Star Trek 6 for this one. They're half the age of what they are now. So they were dealing with the old issue, and they still have another 60 years. It's just just an interesting way to deal with it.
Yeah.
That being said, she's very she's seen everything in this. So it was like there's several times where she just knows how to deal with McCoy. she just plays him perfectly. She knows how to deal with the Admiralty. She knows how to deal with the spies. Like, she's seen everything because of how old she is. And so because of that, she's like unfazed by so much, which a younger Uhura may not have been that way.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, along that, I mean, her age is kind of, it's kind of a through line throughout the entire book. Like, I mean, all the way until the last page of the book, she is, I mean, there's kind of like, it sounds like kind of an inside joke with her staff that every year she's gonna, are you really retiring at the end of next year kind of thing. But because she's as old as she is and because she's done as much and seen as much as she has, she's considering retirement, which, yeah, like you said, it's funny that 60 some odd years before this, she's considering retirement. You know, in Star Trek Generations, during the kind of like Enterprise B stuff, you know, in Star Trek 6, they're talking about retirement. In Star Trek Generations, like Scotty and Chekhov and Kirk, like they're all talking about how they basically are retired, but they're doing these kind of press tours or, you know, whatever. Right.
I don't want to hear anyone complain about the guy that they brought in for the DS9 relaunch. Who's like 90, Vaughn. Yeah. I don't want to hear anyone complain about Vaughn being 90 and being the captain of a ship. Yeah. She's in charge of Starfleet intelligence at 120.
I know, right? Yeah. And Dr. McCoy, who's retired but not retired. Yeah, 130 years old. But yeah, I mean, it was fun because, yeah, with all these characters that we've got, like, yeah, with McCoy, we got Dr. Crusher. You know, until you were talking about it, and, you know, we talked a little bit before this too, just how different the first and second half of the book is. Uhura is so hands-on in the first part of the book, and putting together this team, consulting with, you know, McCoy, with Crusher on this medical issue that comes up that is affecting the Romulans and could spread, you know, further. It's, you know, into the Federation and everything. And she's having to, you know, work kind of across the border, I guess, with people on the other side. But, you know, bringing in these top minds, and it felt natural. Like, you could probably argue that Dr. Pulaski might have been a better character, just given her age compared to Crusher, because Crusher in this would be, I mean, she was very young when the show started, like when Next Generation started. Dr. Pulaski had been around for a while and, you know, was older, but having her and Dr. McCoy together might have been a little much.
That's why I think it worked well to use Crusher, because she brings a new dynamic. She's young compared to McCoy's old. She is very soft and nice, whereas he is brash and abrasive. Yeah. And so she, you know, contrasts well with him. Pulaski, she's not old, but I mean, she's older. She's very much brash and abrasive like McCoy. Yeah. And so it would have been too much of the same.
Yeah. Plus, we've already had her, you know, in the previous book, Deny Thy Father, and I feel like we had her in another recent book, but I might be confounding that with just another Star Trek book I read for pleasure. I can't remember, but at any rate, like, you know, we get them, and then, you know, with the rest of the, at least, kind of main cast, I guess, for this book on the Federation side, you got Ben Sisko, you got Tuvok, and you got Dr. Solar. So you've got Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and kind of a very, very minor character, but from Next Generation. So Uhura is putting this team together that really spans what we know of, you know, the Star Trek series. And what there have been some of these books, like Well of Souls was one where there was a lot of cameos that just seemed kind of out of place. And I think in Art of the Impossible might have had some too. But, like, you know, sometimes it seems like during this era they were just trying to shove as many characters as they could. But these ones, I felt like with Sisko, Tuvok, and Solar, just kind of worked for what they were doing. You know, like it didn't feel like, you know, you're kind of shoehorning anybody into the story.
Well, that's interesting you said that, because I view it differently. I think that I think Tuvok and Salar perfectly fit. I think that it was the absolute right move for them to be in there. But I felt like Sisko really, what does he have of value is that he's a pilot and that maybe he can do some spy work for them, but you have a bunch of your own spies and you have other pilots, I'm sure. And with automation in Star Trek, it's not like they need this, huge, it's not like you're piloting the Enterprise. It's a smaller ship. You probably don't need that much experience with it. I think it would have worked even better if it was just Tuvok and Tuvok and Salar, and you write it as it's a couple who's an actual couple has to also work together on this mission, and they were the two POV characters. What Sisko brought was, the young husband being away from home, having to grapple with the work versus the kids, the home life versus the work life, things like that. She was able to get that. I think she could have also done that if there had been stuff with Tuvok and Salar. Maybe they had talked about their youngest kids or something.
Well, and Tuvok and Salar were not actually together. His wife is, I forgot.
What's his? But she shows up in the book, though. His actual wife, right?
No,
yeah, I thought she did.
No, I think they might have mentioned her at one point, but Salar and Tuvok were calling each other husband and wife at a point because that was the roles they were playing.
That's right.
And it was confusing, though, because the first time that we see that is the book is told fairly non-linearly. Like, there's a lot of flashbacks, and I think that there was eventually some flash forwards too, because the first time that I think she called him husband, and at the end of that little section he called her wife, or whatever it was.
That explains why I was confused by it. Well,
yeah, okay. And it was kind of because I kept having to flip back and forth because I was like, is she really calling him husband? And then I, especially when it came later where they're being assigned to be to pose as a couple. I think it was a Vulcan couple. I think their Romulan personas were different, but which to me didn't really seem like it needed. That didn't seem necessary either, but that part was extremely confusing. Okay, so in that case, then I feel even more vindicated by saying, yes, they could have just used Tuvok and Salar, and you can tell the husband being away and feeling guilty about being away. You could still tell that they obviously don't have a little kid like we do with Jake, but you could still tell that type of story. It just felt like, Sisko's on, if we can put him on the cover, I think Sisko sells more copies than Tuvok does. Yeah, probably. When you're thinking about selling copies, and honestly, to be honest, they're probably thinking Uhura's not going to sell enough on her own, and Uhura and Tuvok is not going to be the pairing that we need. So it makes sense from a business perspective why you include Sisko in the group. But yeah, and I think because the only other thing that I can think of as a reason why Sisko in particular would have been chosen for this mission is just because of Curzon Dax, who was another character that he did feel a little shoehorned in here because he popped up from time to time. But yeah, I don't know. It's true. Curzon didn't feel as shoehorned in because that's what you do with Curzon Dax is you just shoehorn him into a story. That's what almost every story I've read of his has been there's Curzon. There's Curzon. That's every story that's had him in it that I've read. I've never read one where he was just naturally a part of the character, part of the thing. So that's why maybe that didn't feel out of the blue. Well, some of the other characters that we got in here, which I had to do a little searching on Memory Alpha and elsewhere, but Admiral Tall was, I think, a sub-commander or something in the Enterprise incident episode of TOS where they steal the cloaking device, which is actually referenced multiple times throughout this book. Yes, it is. Kretak, who is she's not exactly Uhura's counterpart, but she's kind of her... friend, confidant, or friend, I guess, on the Romulan side. And Kretak, we know as Senator Kretak from, or is she Senator? I think she's Senator Kretak from Deep Space Nine, but she's the one that is basically the kind of attaché to Deep Space Nine when the Romulans joined the Dominion War, or the war against the Dominion. So, and I think there was probably others too, but, that was, I felt like that was, I mean, she could have created an original character for that, but this just kind of felt, I mean, for me, kind of just felt fine. Admiral Tall was kind of a weird one because he kind of showed up towards the end and didn't really knock my socks off that he was in it or anything, but Kretak was good. And
the danger you have with Kretak is that if there's any, if you want to have suspense on, is Kretak really a good guy?
Mm.
If you know the character beforehand, that's not really there. For instance, I've not watched all of DS9, so I didn't know the character of Kretak. So I spent the book going, oh, is this going to pan out? Like, I really, because it's a spy thing, it opens up with the quote at the very beginning of the book is from the great John le Carré, the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy author. Once I got that, I was already thinking, all right, who's lying? Who's the spy?
Yeah.
Like, I was already wary of anyone that's not one of our main characters. So you probably didn't feel that way because you remembered the character and knew their motivations.
Yeah, I felt that her motivations were true to what we were reading, that she was not trying to do a spy game or, pull one over on Uhura or anything. Once we got further through the book and really kind of the last quarter of the book with the character of Zetha, who Kretak sends over to Uhura, she was the one that I wasn't too sure about. And the author purposefully tries to make you think there's something going on with not just the flashbacks, but also when they're doing the interrogation and Zetha's like, I'm not going to tell him this. Ooh, he figured that out. Yeah. I'm a little worried. And I'm like, why are you worried? You're supposed to be telling him everything. Yeah. Well, I think, with her as a character, it was really interesting too, being in her mind, especially during those times where she's being questioned by Sisko or by Tuvok or by whoever. Because Tuvok could just do a mind meld and know the exact truth. He's choosing not to, which is good. But, we get to see, like, the great thing about her character is, like, we almost feel with her, like, whether are these people okay to trust? Like, we know she can trust Sisko and Tuvok and Solar, but having been raised basically as she was a street urchin on Romulus and she was being trained for something, we didn't know what, for a long time. And we got the impression that she was really bad at all these things that she was doing. And even though we come to find out she's actually she's smart, but she's got, a photographic memory and everything. But to really be inside of her mind and feel that distrust with her, because she's been thrown into this thing. She doesn't even know whether she's going to live or die at the end of it because she's only received so many instructions that get her so far. So, that was pretty good as far as, like, withholding the mystery about her character until the very end.
And it's also kind of like a cheap cop out almost to be like, we'll just have the we don't know your character's motivations. We'll just do a Vulcan mind meld on them. Yeah. Like, I can see why an author wouldn't want to do that. I know that there was controversy when Star Trek VI came out and we had Spock doing the mind meld with the villain,
Valeris.
Valeris doing that, and people were like, it's very violating and stuff. And to me, I'm thinking, look, is he causing her physical harm? No. He didn't, like, mess up anything in her brain. All he was doing was looking for stuff, and he was able to get necessary information on, like, in the world of interrogation techniques. Like, this seems very good. There's no physical harm. I don't think she had trauma. Like, maybe someone wrote about it in a book somewhere, but I didn't get the impression in the movie that she had trauma afterwards from it. And it got the information quickly. Like, to me, I'm like, let's do the mind meld on Zetha. Make sure she's good. Get all the information you need and do it quickly. Like, her slowly opening up to him, I was like, all right, let's move this along.
Speed it along, yeah. I know that people, like, compare a mind meld, especially a forced mind meld, to, like, rape because it's such an intimate experience, but I just kind of always felt too like people like Tuvok, like Spock, like these well-trained, and both Spock and Tuvok were trained in Kolinar. Neither of them actually finished it, like went through that final ceremony or whatever. But I would think and I would hope that Vulcans have developed. I mean, they got these mental blocks that they can put up to where the person who, in the case of Spock and Valeris, like Spock could put up some blocks to say, I am only getting the information I need. I'm not going to touch any other part of her mind, and maybe Tuvok could have done something that with Zetha, but maybe I'm also Deus Ex Machina or, or whatever, kind of like, de-traumatizing, or I don't know, but at the end of the day, I mean, it definitely made it more suspenseful or more mysterious.
As a writer, you don't want to introduce truth serum, because that just takes the mystery off the table. Yeah. We couldn't do that with Deny Thy Father either. They couldn't have like a mind meld or anything like that, because then Starfleet would automatically know that Kyle Riker was legit. He's a good guy, and they would also be able to very, very easily find whoever the villain was in that. So it makes sense why they're playing them out, because you need the suspense.
Yeah. Well, it would have almost been nice too. Like, so if they had done it in here, and to kind of get into a little bit of the actual story here, in the medical mystery. I mean, if they had done a mind meld on her, there would still be the mystery, because she did not know what she was being used for. And we get a lot of medical mysteries in Star Trek. We've had them in the shows to some extent. In the books, we've had a lot of them. There was like a series of 6 novels in the TNG universe called Double Helix that were just one big medical mystery, I guess, over the 6 books, kind of through different eras of Next Generation, if I remember right. So Star Trek's no stranger to this trope. So when I actually started the book and it was like, oh, it's a medical mystery, part of me was kind of like, oh man. But once you get into it, this wasn't anything we'd heard about before or anything. So it didn't really, it wasn't kind of one of these things that like, like the Tomed incident or the attack on Kittimer or anything that we'd like heard about, like, oh, I want to see that story. But like it still did kind of fill this gap and just get some character growth for these characters, and Zetha fit really, kind of pivotally into this, but was the mystery, kind of the mystery box throughout was her and what was her purpose and what was going to come of her. But basically, for those who haven't read the book, there's kind of this plague almost that's got 100% mortality rate, which even the doctors like Dr. Crusher and Dr. McCoy, they're like, that's not a thing. Like, there's nothing with 100% mortality rate, but this thing does. And it was being kind of likened to this old Romulan plague from back in the early days of Romulus, like shortly after they split off from the Vulcans, but then also with like Rigelian fever. And so like this whole mystery is like Sisko and his crew, like Tuvok and Solar and Zetha, going around trying to figure out, where did this come from? Who made it? And is there a cure? And how do we get it? And it never stopped. I feel like, like as much information as we would get about it, there were still tons of questions up until the very end of the book, which, I mean, made for me quite the page turner to, be like, I want to know, where are they going next? Who made this? Why? What's going on? How are they going to fix it?
I really liked the medical mystery, which I usually don't like getting into the science behind Star Trek. I'm like, I don't need to know how the warp engine works. I just want to know that it works. And I'm usually like, I don't care how the medical stuff normally. But I really liked this because it was kind of layered. Yes, they had to figure out first, what's going on with this thing? Is that 100% mortality rate real? Is it across species, or is it just certain species? What planets are it on? And then they had to figure out, what's the pattern? Why is there a pattern? Why is it developing the way it's developing? Then they had to say, okay, once we've answered those, we need to answer how to fix it, how to find a cure. And then once you find that, you also have to figure out who's doing this, because it's, someone like this biological. Someone is like rather not biological, but it's like it's being created. It is not a natural phenomenon. It is a produced problem. And then they get into the bacteria versus virus thing, and that's where they lost me. I was like, okay, just wake me up when you're done with the bacteria versus virus talk. But still, I was interested because I was like, it's the medical stuff had relevance to the political stuff. Like, this could, if it wipes out this planet, or, are the Romulans going to move in and take over? Or this colony, if it gets wiped out, how is the Federation going to get this resource? And so like the medical stuff tied into other parts of the Star Trek storytelling that I do care about. And so that made the medical more interesting to me.
It was, one of the things she did well too with all of this is like we got hints throughout and like threads and kind of callbacks. Like there was stuff set up at the very beginning of the book that she would just kind of touch on throughout the book, and just planting little seeds that as the characters were like sciencing their way through some of this stuff, like you could almost see where they were going, because you were like, okay, well that, and like at some point when the like Rigelian fever or whatever that was came up, it wasn't something that totally came out of the blue. I feel like it was kind of somehow set up, because it was kind of like, oh wait, there was a character that they'd even mentioned how earlier something about Rigelians and how they look human, but you scan them and they look like Vulcans or Romulans, and that wasn't for nothing, and just these little seeds that get planted throughout, which I think was one of the things that helped for me to keep plugging through all this stuff, like all the sciencey stuff too, because I don't care about the cells or the, right. And they used a lot of examples from human history, which I thought was interesting. They didn't do the typical 2 humans and a third from something we've never heard, like a third made up thing,
Right. Yeah. Like they talked about like Ebola and Spanish flu. And I was like, oh, I actually know. Yeah. I know what those are.
Yeah. Now, and then HIV was one that came up too.
HIV. That's right. Now, if this book was written like, today, you absolutely know there would have been a COVID.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Thrown in there somehow. Whereas it's funny because Ebola had been around, had been in the news even around this time that this was happening. And maybe because it's dated now, it felt natural that they'd talk about it. But if I was reading the book today and it mentioned COVID, I would feel like, it feels too close. And so like, it's interesting how that works, that when it's, we've put a lot of time behind it, it feels like it's a natural discussion that
because it's having. A part of history, which I mean, COVID is a part of our history now, but it's pretty recent history.
It's kind of like when we were reading the Greg Cox book, and there are discussions about COVID, and there are terminology that's used, the 2020's terminology, and I just felt that's weird to hear that in a book. But when I revisit that book 20 years from now, and I look back at it, I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, of course, that's how people talked.
Yeah.
That makes total sense that they use that term.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it was interesting, too, because you could, like, as I was reading this, like, I could see COVID in there, too, like, as just another line, like, it was just in my brain, because as they were mentioning kind of the similarities with some of these things and showing examples of these previous diseases, bubonic plague was one, it was like everything. I could see them naturally just going right into COVID after HIV, because that was kind of the next biggest thing that happened. And, they even talked about like, the word pandemic that was thrown around a few times. And one thing I thought was pretty funny was I can't remember which planet it was they were on, but they had segregated all the people who were sick and like closed them off in the kind of this city or whatever, was in a bunch of different domes, and so they put all the sick people into a couple different domes, and I was like, social distancing kind of, but but what was funny too is one of the characters in there said that that wouldn't stop a disease. Like, you know, like it was actually kind of like the opposite thinking was like, well, that's not going to work. It's still going to get out or whatever, even though like then they concluded like, no, the people who were in there, like everybody died. They didn't get any cases outside of that. But yeah, it was just interesting that, and I'm actually glad that she didn't start picking some. I mean, Regillian fever obviously is a made up thing, and then the Romulan.
But I feel like Regillian fever is like one of those you hear it and you've heard it so many times in Star Trek that it feels like it's like a real thing. It feels like
a real thing, yeah. But you know, like if they'd have been like, oh, you know, like we're gonna use, you know, the, you know, Talaxian such and such, or, you know, whatever, like as our kind of key thing that we're going to compare it to, we'd be like, you know, I don't connect this with this at all. But HIV was the one that they kind of stuck with the most as the most similar thing because of the autoimmune issues that the one in the book portrayed also. And so it just hit closer to home because it's something I've heard of, I'm familiar with, I've, you know, lived through this era, you know, so I know it, and it just, it made the book more accessible, I think, in some ways.
And it was interesting going through the science of, and this is pointed out early in the book, but it's also pointed out later on when they're talking about the percent survivability rate of the viruses and stuff. They talk about Spanish flu, and they talk about how it had a 2.5% mortality rate, which was pretty high at the time. And so you think, oh my goodness, you know, 2.5%. I mean, that's, you know, I think COVID was probably in a similar range.
Yeah.
But like, and we thought that was bad and how that affected the world. A 100% mortality, even if they hadn't made it 100%, even if she had hedged her bet and said, oh, it's a 90% mortality rate, comparatively, that's still ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it just shows how much more of an actual threat this is. And it also, like, to the people, it's like you know, there's one moment in the book where Uhura is in a meeting with all of the doctors, and she gets a call, and it's one of her spies, which I think it was on Romulus, but maybe it was somewhere else. Anyway, Uhura gets a call from one of her spies, and the spy's relaying all this information, showing all these videos, and the spy says, well, I need to sign off. I just got sick, so see you later.
Oh, that's
and
right,
Uhura's like, I just like that's the last time I'm going to see him because he's going to die. And that's like he's it's not that she's, oh, he's going to get sick and maybe die. It's she's thinking, no, he's going to die from this because it has 100% mortality rate.
Right.
And I was like, man, that once he got sick, it's like in a medical drama when like the doctor gets sick and you're like, oh no, the doctor's, that's how I felt with him. It was like, crap, now we don't have that spy anymore.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting how they dealt with that too, which I felt was appropriate, you know, because it, you know, Uhura in her thoughts is kind of like, yeah, like this is the last time I'm going to speak with that person. That sucks. Like this is my person. Like I sent them there, you know, whatever.
I know them.
Yeah, I know them personally. Yeah, like, but she also has to say like, but I've got a job to do right now. Like I'm gonna have to grieve him later. And then somebody else even kind of voices that too, like the CNC or whoever it was that she was actually like conversing with when this went down, or, you know, had reported to, and said, look, I know you just lost a person, but I'm going to have to ask you to like table that for now and deal with the crisis at hand, which kind of makes you, I mean, for most of us in life, when some like a tragedy happens or you lose a loved one, you can kind of stop what you're doing and grieve and deal with it. But people in like Uhura's position, or, you know, like, you know, even today, like we've got people in the military, or, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of other professions where you kind of have to push through some of those traumatic experiences and deal with them later, which, you know, we didn't really get to see that for Uhura, like see her afterwards, like grieving, like kind of in the epilogue. I would have hoped that we would have gotten something there, but just the fact that they addressed it at the time, like, look, you know, this sucks. I know you lost someone, and she's thinking, geez, this sucks. I just lost someone. But, you know, just kind of, you know, it's something that I think a lot of us don't think about, that there are people who literally have to do that, you know, in the world.
And there's a balance because and they show this in like when you watch like a Mission Impossible movie, which is very much the spy game type stuff that this has. But you know, they talk in there how they say no, you can't think about the people individually. You need to view them as a whole. And then Ethan Hunt's like, no, I need to care about every single life. And there's actually like a balance. When you think about it, there's like a balance that you have to have both. You have to be able to think, I don't want to lose civilian lives if I can, and I don't want to lose any lives of anyone, soldiers, civilians, whatever. So you want to have that protection of life instinct. But you also have to have the instinct of, if stopping this means, you know, means you have to deal with this, what do you do? Like we just had, you know, our teacher training at my school, we were talking about how if a terrible event like a shooting or something happened, when to lock the doors and stuff. And we were saying, well, what if a student's out in the hallway and they get locked out of the room? Do we let them back in? The answer is no, because we don't know what's happening. You don't want to risk the 20 that you have in the room at the same time for the one. So there's a very there's that individual versus collective mindset. You have to have both. That you have to think. As the head of Starfleet Intelligence, that's exactly what Uhura is thinking. She's thinking, you know, I just lost someone that's important, and I have to remember that. But at the same time, she's like, I've got the bigger picture. He sacrificed himself for the greater good, and we have to get this done. And so, like, it's a very complex thing that's hard to get across in books. And I think that Margaret actually did a pretty good job with this.
I agree. And, you know, I'm sure our listeners are screaming at us, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Right. Yes, that's all true.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, exactly what you were saying and exactly kind of what she had to do with, you know, not in so many words, you know, and I just, it was such a short moment in the book. And, you know, like throughout the entire book, she's talking about her listeners that she's got, you know, kind of peppered throughout, you know, the neutral zone and in Romulan space and whatever. And then to hear about one of those listeners like dying like that, you know, it's such a quick moment, and we focus on it for just like maybe half a page, and then we have to move on. And I thought it was handled really well, and I mean, obviously, it gave us something to think about, which is always what you want from a book. You know, and one of the other things that the way the book was written. You know, I kind of call it nonlinear storytelling, but it's really kind of flashbacks. And I think in some places, like there was some confusion of maybe so there were some flash forwards. Yeah. But there was actually, I think, even some places where we had flashbacks within flashbacks. And I'm still a little unsure whether how much I liked this, because we definitely, like, she was definitely doing a show not tell situation with these flashbacks. Like, it wasn't quite like Family Guy. We're not doing a flashback just for the joke, but like she would get to a point where something needs to be explained. So we would get a flashback to see how somebody ended up where they were. I think ultimately where I land is that I liked it because it really kept the story moving. We didn't just have these long, you know, 10s and 20s of pages of just like the same point of view of the same thing happening, and then just a bunch of explanation and exposition. We actually get these flashbacks and get to see the situations as they would have happened.
I think that flashbacks work the best when it is clearly delineated in the story. I like it personally as a reader when there's a chapter break between flashbacks and flash forwards, and you get a heading on the chapter that says 2263, 2363, and you're getting the specific year, you know, for instance, we keep referencing this, going back to the Greg Cox book that just came out a couple months ago. That book had those clear delineations. That book messed with the timeline so much, but I always knew I would start a chapter, instantly knew exactly what I needed to know about the time and stuff, because, you know, it was clearly on there. And here, they're mid-chapter, which is sometimes they were italicized, sometimes they weren't.
Yeah.
And then, so mid-chapter makes it muddy. Italicized, sometimes italicized, otherwise makes it muddy. And then you were right. There are a few times in here where it's a flashback within a flashback. again, you have to be top game in order to make that work for the reader. And there were times I was confused.
Yeah.
And the flash forwards, I'm not a fan of flash forwards usually.
Yeah.
So I don't think that was the strongest. I mean, it was unique because it made the book memorable, but it made it a little bit too complicated, I think.
Well, there were so many of them because, like, there were some of them that were maybe a paragraph.
Right. Yes.
And it was like, yeah, I didn't need that. Like, I didn't need that. Know, and sometimes it's like you could have taken that out and it wouldn't have taken anything out of the story, or you could have had one sentence that explained what Zetha was remembering, or something about her upbringing. Because there were a few times where the flashbacks or the flashbacks within the flashbacks were so long that either when I got to the chapter break or when I got back to the kind of quote unquote present time, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot they're on the ship and they're going somewhere or whatever. Like, there was more than a couple times where I did have to flip back a couple pages to kind of go, what was that? Who's talking? What am I, so.
And I wonder if that was a Margaret Wander Bonanno situation or if that was a Pocket situation, because there was a determined effort with this series to make it longer than normal.
Yeah.
And when we're looking at late 90s, early 2000s, the books were 200 on the short end, 350 maybe on the long end, unless you had like a long Peter David book. But most of the books were 200 to 300 pages, and they had that traditional Star Trek font that was pretty large, pretty big font. These are 350, 400, 450 in the case of Ball of Souls, and they are also really, really small font for Star Trek. And so, but because it was every single book that I've read, I don't know the first like 2 that you guys talked about before I got here, but at least for the 4 I've talked about, all of them have had this, which makes me wonder if it was like the authors were required to do all this extra story because Pocket wanted to do this long book.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be curious to find out.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because I could see that. It'd be interesting to hear from one of our author friends kind of how much. I think in today's world, like there's some guidance that they get from the publisher and from CBS, Paramount.
It's the statute of limitations on this. I think is passed. I don't think that they have to keep this secret anymore.
Well, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this author's passed away, but I wouldn't be shocked if the publisher and or the network said, hey, we need more story, so go ahead and throw some flashbacks so we get a little bit more, not just 2360, but we get like 5 years before that or something like that. But also I think even with some of the characters, because like, with, Ben Sisko, to your point earlier, I can appreciate that he was an odd choice. Like of all the people that we could have encountered, at this point in history, especially as far as pilots or engineers go. I mean, Geordi, would have been a good engineer if that's what they needed. Or, I mean, we just got Will Riker in the last one. We know he's an amazing pilot and part of early in Starfleet now. But I wouldn't be shocked if the publisher and or the network had said, like, look, you need to cross over. You need somebody from all the series. Because we got Deep Space Nine, Voyager, TNG, like Enterprise is too far in the past to really get much. I wish we should have gotten to Paul somewhere in one of these books, and maybe we did. Might have been like the first one. I can't remember, but it's hard to say. But yeah, there does seem like sometimes when there's a little extra fluff in the book, like, oh, is that just padding?
I was also surprised that with all the talk of the Romulans in this book, there is one TOS character who is alive, but is not discussed at all, really. Now, Spock. And this is, I think, a little bit before he went all in on the whole Romulan reunification stuff. Because that's really more the TNG. I mean, this is 4 years earlier, so I don't know what he was doing during this time. But I feel like he showed up talking about the Romulan stuff before.
Yeah. This would have been
one
about
of the previous books.
But yeah, I think this was like 6 or 7 years before the episode of Unification, and I don't remember if in that episode they said like when Spock really started those efforts, or because he's not mentioned like at all. I mean, we get some talk of reunification and some of the people kind of with that mindset in this book a little bit, but I'd be kind of curious, like, does Uhura think he's dead? Does McCoy? I mean, like, McCoy even kind of mentions him at some point about his kind of verbal sparring with Spock, but that's as far as it was for him. It was just more of a memory of doing that, like, and it was kind of implying like, well, where's Spock now? Huh. Yeah, it could be. Yeah. And you know what, though? I mean, I think that his, with Star Trek 6, and, what I put in the notes here is that this book, and you mentioned earlier too, is kind of a low key sequel to Star Trek 6, in that Uhura meets Kretak. Like, that's kind of where their relationship begins. It's really the only time they ever meet in person is at Khitomer, after the events of Star Trek 6. And the events of that movie are really what gets Spock going on. He wants peace with the Klingons. Right. And you could see that leading into him also really started to dive into reunification with the Romulans, since he's really obviously trying to bring everybody together and be one big happy family. But Star Trek 6 is my favorite of the original series movies. And so whenever there was a spot in this book where, and I think it was that scene where they were meeting and kind of rehashing the events of, the end of that movie, that I was kind of giddy, because I was like, I love this stuff. Too.
Yes, I love it when done properly. I love when you get to see an extended scene, like as like a tacked on scene from a movie or something. And that's absolutely how this felt, in a good way. And so when they're on Khitomer, and she's talking with the girl, but then the other people come into the room, and she kind of fades away, and like they know they're not going to see each other for a while. Like, I thought that was excellently done, because I felt like I could visualize the type of room. Now, we don't see that many rooms in Khitomer, but like, because we did have that movie, I felt like I could visualize that sequence, and I could see what Margaret was going for in this. And I liked tying it in with saying that's also partially what got Uhura into the whole spy business in the first place. Right. Was she had made a connection with this girl that would pay dividends 60 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's funny because these books, these Lost Era books, the historian's note at the beginning tells you how long it's been since Kirk's apparent death in Star Trek Generations, which I think it was actually 67 years. So really, it's probably more like 70 years from Star Trek 6, and then how long it is before Next Generation. But it's funny how many of these books really tie back to Star Trek 6 mostly, just because that was the last of the TOS movies proper.
And as you said, one of the best.
And one of the best, yeah. And, like, it kind of occurs to me, like, I guess we don't get Scotty in any of these books because he's in a transporter somewhere.
Right.
Chekhov, who was in Star Trek Generations, I can't remember if we got him in any of these books, but I believe he's killed off in one of the that you and I were talking about before we started recording, like Vulcan's Heart or Vulcan's Forge. I think he's killed in, or Vulcan's Soul, one of those books. I think Admiral Chekhov or whatever is killed off in one of those. So,
which makes it interesting because, like, obviously these were all written well before the new shows, but like in my mind, I'm always trying to say, okay, how would this fit in or something?
Yeah,
and they established in this Picard season 3 finale, when they start the episode and they have Anton Chekhov on the voiceover, he says, as my father used to say, and I was so frustrated that he didn't say grandfather, because that means that our Chekhov had to have lived up to a certain point, at least 100 years before the events of Picard. Yeah. If he has a son that's 100 in Picard, or however old he's supposed to be, or if he's younger than 100, he was, So I was just like, if you had made a grandson, so easy to say he had a kid at some point in the story. So, like, if he's killed off this point of the book, so I'm like, that means we can't jive them together because he has to be alive later on.
Well, I mean, Anton Chekhov, if he's Pavel Chekhov's son, would be alive at this point, because this book, so Picard takes place 20 years after Nemesis, which was 15 years
like
after
right
the
at
beginning.
The turn of it's like 20.
2400.
400. Yeah.
So
and this is
it's 40 years after this book. So it could,
so maybe he's still alive by the time of this book. But
either way, it's
weird.
Yeah, it is weird, and I don't know. Sometimes you want to forget those first scenes of Star Trek Generations, just because I don't know. It's just.
That's my favorite part of the whole movie. The first scene. That's my favorite. And in the book, we're way off topic. Yeah. But in the novelization Generations, the first 70 pages of that novelization, like some of the best novelization ever.
Well, but it's also not in the movie. Like it's like deleted scenes, but
like I still appreciate the movie, and I think I appreciate it more because I'm thinking about the background stuff that's happening there. But no, I loved, like, I'm not one of those that was disappointed with Kirk's death. I
wasn't disappointed with Kirk's death. I just thought, like, some of the stuff, like on the Enterprise B, was a little cheesy. And
I know, but I loved, like, I make the Only on Tuesdays. Like, it's not coming until next Tuesday. I make that joke all the time. No, nobody gets it, but I make it.
That's funny.
I love the character of Harriman.
That's funny. Oh. Well, yes.
Just
to pull us back on topic, I guess. Like, obviously we've dumped some praise on this book. We've had some gripes, but I'm curious if you got any final thoughts, or otherwise, what would you rate this book?
Well, my final thought is, with the epilogue, I was actually on pins and needles to find out if she would retire or not, and she weighs whether or not Uhura's gonna hang it all up. And she keeps thinking, well, if I give it up, who's going to take over? And she sees those guys who are going to take over, and she's like, I don't think they're going to do a good job. She says, hold on, just another day. And she puts it aside and leaves it for now. And I was like, I thought we were going to get this great swan song for her character. But they I'm betting that Margaret Bonanno was not allowed to have her actually hang it up, because your rule is, unless you really have the intent of doing something, don't write yourself into the corner. Like, they could not write her as giving up, because then if they ever want to do another book with her as the head of Starfleet Intelligence after this, they'd be, hamstrung.
They kind of wreck their own continuity,
Right. So that's why they're like, you know what? She's leaving it for another day. But I was like, that would have been such a good ending that she's like, all right, I have completed the mission. I have protected Romulus. I've protected all these places from the flu. I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah, what's funny about that scene too. I was pretty happy when that person showed up, especially because earlier in the book somebody was talking about different kind of we'll call them sections within within Starfleet Intelligence, and like Black Ops and just kind of the general intelligence and that kind of thing, and any other more deep cover or, unacknowledged. And Uhura goes, there are no other kinds of, we have no other groups than that, or something like that. And it's like, they were trying to talk about Section 31 there. But then, in that epilogue with that scene, I want to see more. Like that one, it was another scene in this book that it didn't need to be there. It didn't really add anything to it, but it made me go, I want more between these two characters, and to see where this cameo person, where they go from here, and, between now and the next time we see them. And I thought it was just that was a good cameo, I thought.
I would give the book, you asked this earlier, I would give the book overall a 7 out of 10. I loved the first half of this book. The second half of the book I thought was just okay. I didn't particularly love, like, once they got on the mission, and Tuvok and Salar and Cisco go on out, and Zitha is kind of with them, and they're tracking down the Orion guy. I think it was what it was. Like all that part of the book, I was just like, it was fine. I didn't dislike it, but it was fine. But I really liked the opening, so that's why I'll give the book an overall 7 out of 10.
Nice. Yeah, I think, I ended up giving this, on Goodreads, I gave it a 5, but I think, if I'm being fair with myself, it's really a 4.5 or a 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this one, especially when I put it up next to the other ones. This is right up there with Deny Thy Father, except I think I actually enjoyed this one even a little bit more, just with the mystery and the kind of the intrigue and suspense behind it. It did get a little slower towards the end, or kind of the second half of the book, but really once you got to the last quarter of the book, it
does fly by at the very, very end. It
flies by, and some could argue that it just kind of ended.
Mm-hmm.
But I also felt like the way they ended it, like it wasn't something that I saw coming. But then once the kind of resolution to this medical mystery happened, I was pretty happy because I could then, like, if I were to go back and reread this, I think I would be able to pick up the threads that she was putting down earlier on, and it just felt pretty just well done, holistically, especially compared to some of the other ones that we've read in this little series. Well, we have finished the ones that at least say the Lost Era on the cover. I think there's some other ones that technically fall into this era, like Terok Nor, which we haven't gone through yet. But this has been a long time coming. Like, we and other previous hosts of Literary Treks have been talking about these for a long time. So it's always nice to kind of close one chapter, because it just gives us opportunities to dive into other things.
But I'm really excited about where we're going next, because the next book we're going to read is Star Trek Voyager, The Nanotech War, by Stephen, I'm going to butcher this last name, Pizix?
Sure.
Which I'm excited because it is A, Voyager, B, on the cover you have 7 of 9, and you have Tom Paris with like a Borg hand or something. I'm already intrigued by this one. I have it on order. I'm ready to read it.
Nice. Yeah, I already got my copy. I'm looking forward to it too. I remember when this one came out, and it was just because it was like one of the first. It was one of the first books after the numbered books kind of ended. They were like, okay, we're done with the numbering system, and then like this, so it was like the first like paperback that was non-numbered, and yeah, looking forward to it.
I was like, this is the age difference. I was like 2 when this came out.
Oh, nice.
That's why I don't remember it.
Yeah, I remember when a lot of these books came out. Oh, well, when you're not making me feel especially old, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
You can find me on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Jonathan Koan. I talk all things books, all genres, all series. And then you can also find just general takes, sometimes books, sometimes movies, sometimes TV shows on Twitter, on X, or as I call it, Twix. And then you can also find my written reviews on Goodreads. Just search my name, Jonathan Koan. And I'm on Facebook at Jonathan Koan. So yeah, I'm on all those places.
At Jonathan Koan. It's nice and easy.
Easy branding. No one else has that yet.
Good. Well, you can find me on Goodreads, Letterboxd. I guess you can find me on X and Instagram at Knitting Trekkie. And then you can also find me poking around on Facebook and the Babel Conference. And yeah, definitely encourage people to find us there. But really, thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.